You sold my dead bird to a blind kid? Hello everyone, welcome to episode number 90 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about rugby. My name is Nathan Pottle and thank you for joining me today. And I've made the decision to release 2 episodes in one day, so we've got the Soul review and now here Wonder Woman 1984, so Happy New Year and Merry Christmas to all of you. Here's 2 episodes in one day. Next week, I'm going to be doing my most anticipated movies of the year list. So next week, stay tuned for that episode. I'm pretty excited to go through and talk about the movies that I talked about for 2020 that are now going to be coming out in 2021. Isn't that exciting? But anyway, today, I'm talking about Wonder Woman 1984. And this movie has kind of sparked some controversy on the internet. There's some problematic things that people are having issues with. There are just people who are hating the movie in general. And I'm sitting here to tell you that I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I don't neither love nor hate this movie. I think it's good. And I'm going to get into exactly why, like where this movie's strengths are, where the weaknesses are. We're going to get into all of that today. As usual, we're doing non-spoilers first. And then I'm going to give you the warning that, hey, we're going to get into the spoilers section. So why don't we just get right into it, because I've got a lot to say about this movie. So first off, the story of this movie. Basically, it's Wonder Woman, Diana. She's living in 1984, and it's the 80s, and she's being Wonder Woman, but in secret, so that people don't really know who she is. She's a mystery woman who foils bank robbers and whatnot. She's working at the Smithsonian Library and works with Kristen Wiig's character, whose name is Barbara. Yeah, she's working with Barbara, and Barbara is working on some stuff, and we have some mystery, and then Max Lord comes in, and he's doing weird stuff, and then we kind of have our story. There's not a lot released in the trailers about the actual story of this movie, so I don't want to give too much away about what it is. We'll talk about it more specifically in the spoiler section, because I have very specific thoughts and ideas about kind of what this story is about and what it means, and that's kind of what this is. But I can't really talk about Wonder Woman 1984 without briefly touching on my thoughts of the first Wonder Woman. Now, I rewatched it earlier in the week, just a few days before Wonder Woman 84 came out, so that I could have kind of a clearer picture going into this movie and refresh myself on what happens. Now, I do not think that Wonder Woman from 2017 has aged spectacularly. I think it's aged a little bit poorly, especially the beginning and the end of this movie. All the stuff on Themyscira is very exposition heavy. It's kind of shaky. I think it's a poor setup for the rest of the film. Everything in the middle, I think, is great. When she's going through London and experiencing the world for the first time, when she goes to the front lines in World War I and she goes through no man's land, I think all of that is spectacular. By the time we get to the end and she's fighting Ares and there's this pillar up in the sky and just explosions everywhere, I think it's a very shaky climax, and I don't really like it that much. So overall, I think Wonder Woman is just okay. I don't think it's spectacular. I don't think it's amazing. I think it's just good, and that's how I feel about this movie as well. I think that this new movie parallels the first one in the sense that the opening is very shaky. We open the movie on a flashback scene on Themyscira when Wonder Woman is a child, and it has absolutely zero bearing on the story or the journey that Wonder Woman goes on throughout the film. It just could be completely cut out of this movie. This movie's 2.5 hours long, and this is about a 10 to 15 minute sequence that the movie opens with that could be completely cut, and the entire movie would be exactly the same. We could have opened in the 1980s, and the next opening scene after that, the first time we see the 80s, Wonder Woman is foiling a bank robbery, and that's how this movie could have opened. I don't think we needed the Themyscira flashback at all. I think it was just an excuse to get Robin Wright and the other characters from the first movie back, because other than that, they're completely out of the picture. And I think that that's okay. I don't think we needed to revisit Themyscira at all. It was completely irrelevant to everything. If they could have found a way to tie that in, then it could have made sense and I would have been okay with it. But as it stands, the movie as a whole, we could have done without that, and the movie didn't need to be 2.5 hours long. And then going back to the parallels thing, the ending of the first Wonder Woman and this one, I think, differ majorly. I have very specific thoughts about the actual climax of this movie that I will talk about later, but I think that it was good for the most part. What I do want to talk about in the non-spoiler section is the performances. The main characters of Gal Gadot, I've also heard it pronounced Gal Gadot, I don't know, I'm going to say Gal Gadot. Chris Pine, Pedro Pascal, and Kristen Wiig, I think all of them were pretty good. I think the standout performance is Pedro Pascal in this movie. I think he has the most interesting story and the most clear motivations. Actually, Chris Pine doesn't have any motivations at all. He's just there to experience the 1980s and do funny things and have a good and be charismatic. That's what he is. Chris Pine is a very charismatic actor. When he's on screen, he's just so charming. I like him a lot. But mostly he's in this movie just to experience the 1980s, and that's one thing that I appreciated about this movie is it doesn't really beat us over the head with the 1980s. I thought that it might. Just like, oh, look, here's an 80s thing, here's an 80s thing, here's an 80s thing. And we really don't get a ton of that. We get little bits of it sprinkled throughout the film. We get kind of another parallel to the first movie where Wonder Woman is in London and she's trying on all these clothes. We get a scene in this movie where Chris Pine is trying on 1980s clothes and he's experiencing this new time era. And I don't think that's a spoiler at all. It's in the trailers where he's got the fanny pack and wearing the ridiculous clothes. So that's a pretty fun scene. And that's pretty much all Chris Pine is in this movie to do, is to provide a little bit of levity, because other stuff is a little more serious. Pedro Pascal especially is serious. Kristen Wiig, she plays the character of Barbara, who then becomes the cheetah, also in the trailers, not a spoiler. And her character is a little bit of a combination of Catwoman and the Riddler from the 1980s and 90s Batman movies. I think that really her character blends those two well together, the best parts of each character. She is like athletic and wants to be more popular and is kind of nerdy and awkward and nobody wants to be around her, and then her character makes this shift and we get to see the real her come out, and she's a lot more fun and having a good time. And I think that Kristen Wiig is, I don't know if exactly she was the best fit for this character, but we were given what we were given, and I think for what it was, that it was good enough. Now, circling back to why Barbara kind of opens up and starts to become her own person, the reason for that is not really revealed in the trailer, so I'm not going to talk about it, but it's kind of a goofy little story plot element. What drives the movie forward, and really what drives the entire movie forward, is this one storytelling element that I will talk about in the spoiler section, but really it's kind of silly, but really it's not when you stop to think about it. If you stop to think about it, this is a world of gods, and in the first movie, Diana talks 100% seriously about how she was made from clay and then brought to life by Zeus. So if that's something that you can buy into, then you can buy into this storytelling element for the second movie, and everything is going to be just fine. A lot of people are really hating on the story of this movie, but I think that really, if you look at the world that they're living in and other ridiculous things, I think you can buy into this no problem. I've seen a lot of Twitter hate about this movie. A lot of people really hate it, and I don't know exactly why. There are problems with the movie. It is not perfect, but I think overall it is enjoyable. I liked watching it. Now, that being said, Twitter is a very hateful place, and it's hard to find really a lot of positive things on Twitter in the first place. I've recently been considering just getting rid of my Twitter altogether because I don't really use it a ton, and every time I'm on it, I'm just discouraged because everyone is so angry about stuff on Twitter. So maybe I'll get rid of it in general or not, but either way, people who are angry are on Twitter and they're angry about this movie, and I don't see what there is in this movie to really cause such anger towards it. I see that there are issues, I see that there are problems, but I don't think it's so bad as to get that upset about. Now, granted, I've been that upset about other movies. Don't even get me started on movies like Suicide Squad or The Rise of Skywalker. I hate both of those movies and they upset me, and there's a lot wrong with both of those movies, but I don't think Wonder Woman 1984 is anywhere near on that level. I think it's a very middle-of-the-road type movie. It calls back to a lot of different styles. When Wonder Woman is swinging around in the 1980s and she's saving people, it feels a lot like the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, where it even feels a little bit on the level of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans where he's swinging around and saving everybody. Wonder Woman really uses her lasso, her magic lasso, in a lot of different ways in this movie, and it seems like it can just kind of do whatever she wants it to do. There seems to be no limits to the lasso of truth. It can make her have people tell her the truth. It can show people truth. It can swing around like Spider-Man's web. It can attach itself to lightning. It can do anything pretty much. So it feels a little bit overpowered the way she's using it in this movie, but I think overall it's pretty fine. Speaking of the lasso of truth, though, let's talk about the major theme of this movie. Throughout the film, they're peppering in themes of truth. Now, I don't think that what's actually happening in the story really reflects a theme of accepting the truth and understanding the truth and things like that. I don't think that the actual plot elements and the theme that they're trying to enforce in those elements, I don't think it sticks. I think it's very shaky and kind of loosely shoehorned in there just so that they could have some kind of theme throughout the film. I don't think it works, especially because they are almost bashing us over the head with the word truth, and it comes up again and again, and especially when we get to the big finale, it's a whole thing about accepting the truth and whatever. And I think that that's a fine theme. I think that it would work better in a different context, or if the story was slightly different, if you changed a couple of different things, then it would work better overall. There are also some of the story elements that I think could have been tweaked a little bit to make it just a little bit stronger. This movie is good, but with the right changes and adjustments, it could have been great. And it just wasn't great. It was just good. I'd say it's probably on par with the first Wonder Woman movie. Of course, watch it for yourself, check it out, see if you agree or if you disagree, whatever. If you're in the US, you can watch it on HBO Max or in a theater if you're lucky enough to have theaters open. For me, here in Canada, we rented it on iTunes because that's how it was available for us. My wife and I, we both watched it, we both enjoyed it, and maybe I'll watch it again, maybe I won't, who knows. Actually, no, I probably will watch it again. I enjoyed it enough to watch it an additional time. When that's going to be, though, I have no idea, because I am just, my list of movies to watch and movies to rewatch, it's just so long. I might watch Sonic the Hedgehog coming up. I see it's on Amazon Prime now, so I might check that out. I might watch something else. Who knows? I've got so many movies to watch. It's insane and ridiculous, but I love watching movies, so I'm going to do it. I think that's going to be pretty much it, though, for my non-spoilers. Why don't we move into spoilers so I can talk a little bit more clearly on these points that I'm trying to make. So spoilers start right now. Let's talk first about the entire plot-driven force, and that is the wishes. We have this wish rock that was made by some trickster god. What I would have liked to know a little bit more about exactly who this trickster god is and what is going on, but maybe they felt that was too close to Loki and they didn't want to draw too many parallels to Marvel, because this movie already draws a lot of parallels to Marvel, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So we didn't get a lot about the wishes. Now, the wishes are the thing that I was talking about, where it's a little bit goofy and silly. But let's remember, Wonder Woman was made out of clay and brought to life. So if you can buy that, you can buy into the wishes, it's not a big deal, it's not a problem. Once you're on board, it's fine. The big issue that I do have with the wishes, though, is that the thing at the end where Pedro Pascal is at this military base and he's using satellites to talk to everybody and accept their wishes, and it counts as contact, I don't buy it for a second. You have to be in contact with the wishing rock in order to make a wish, and there's no way that this satellite projection system is akin to making physical contact with these people. I don't buy it for a second. I think it's ridiculous, and I'm not into it. Other than that, though, I was pretty fine with the climax of this movie. I did think it was better than the climax of the first Wonder Woman. The fight with Cheetah was a little bit lackluster, but I did like the look of Cheetah a lot. I thought that she looked really cool, and I was really interested in kind of finding out more about that look and how that transformation took place. We didn't get to see very much of it, though. I would have liked a little bit more Cheetah stuff. And then, of course, in the climax, we also have Wonder Woman making this big speech about truth and accepting, and everyone just kind of giving up their wishes. I don't 100% buy that so many people would renounce their wishes just by Wonder Woman talking a little bit. I don't really buy that a ton, but there's got to be a suspension of disbelief somewhere, so it's not the end of the world. I don't think it's anywhere near as goofy or poor as the final scene of the first Wonder Woman. We did get a couple of surprises in this movie that I never thought we would get. First off, I never thought we would see an invisible jet. Some people are all up in arms that her making the jet invisible is part of her power subset. The way that they explained it, I was fine with Zeus was able to make an island invisible, so because she's the daughter of Zeus or something, she's able to make things invisible. And I found it was a funny little moment where she said, well, I've only tried it once before on a mug, and I turned it invisible, and then I lost the mug. So that was a little funny moment. We don't get a ton of comic relief in this movie. It's mostly from Chris Pine, and other than that, this movie is pretty serious, especially when you talk about Pedro Pascal. Now, I think he was the most compelling character in the movie. He's doing everything for his son, but then he's kind of losing his way and getting so caught up in all of the wishes, and then he has to get his health back and all of these things that he's got going on. But the root of it is that he was doing this all for his son, and he wanted to be a better father than his father, and he wanted to provide, and he wanted to be loving, but he lost his way. And I found that to be very compelling. I liked that element of the story a lot, and I think coming out of this movie, he gave the best performance out of all the characters. And Pedro Pascal, he's really popular right now. He is the Mandalorian. If you weren't familiar, he's the guy who's underneath the Mandalorian helmet. If you've watched season 2 of The Mandalorian, it's pretty great. If you haven't, I recommend going to check it out. It's a pretty good show, and I'm always astounded at how well Pedro Pascal can perform underneath that mask, and the way he tilts his head or moves his body, you can definitely always tell exactly how his character is feeling about things, even though you can't see his face at all. So him in this movie where you get to see his face and he's reacting about all these different things, I like it a lot. I think it's good stuff. He really delivers. One thing about him, though, is that when he starts giving wishes to everybody and everyone's getting their wishes, because there are so many wishes being granted, it starts to spark all of this chaos. And the movie doesn't really do a fantastic job of explaining to us that all of this chaos is coming from too many people getting their way and getting their wishes. Obviously, you're able to pick up on it, but I wish the movie would have just been a little bit more clear for anyone who wasn't able to pick up on it, so that they could see for sure, oh, it's because of everybody getting their wish that things are going so horribly. And the movie kind of explains that these other societies, they all started to crumble and fall apart because they were all getting their wishes. But then you kind of have to put those pieces together yourself, and I wish the movie would have just been a little more clear on that for people who weren't maybe able to pick up on it and were confused about why people are flipping cars and burning the streets and why that kind of stuff is happening. Just would have liked a little more clarity. Also, like I said in the non-spoiler section, that opening scene at Themyscira, get rid of it, cut it out. It's completely useless. We don't need it at all whatsoever. I also saw some people complaining online about the scene in the mall where Wonder Woman is swinging in and saving people in the mall. I actually like that action sequence quite a bit, so we didn't really need to cut that. If we did need to change an action sequence, I would probably change the one that's in Egypt and change that up a little bit just to make it a little more visually interesting, especially to solidify the fact that Diana is losing her powers at that point. Other than her getting shot, we don't really see any change in her abilities. Like, she's still flipping cars and going around the place, and we never really get a sense of if she's bulletproof or not, because she's always just hitting the bullets with her wrist things. What are they called? Do they have a name? I don't know. When a bullet flies at her, she usually hits it with her wrist thing, and that's kind of it. We don't know if she's actually bulletproof or not, so when we see her get shot, is that because she's no longer bulletproof, or is it because she's too slow and got hit by a bullet, or is it because of some other element? Who knows? I would just like a little more clarity on that. And really, as far as the story goes, she didn't really need to go to Egypt to get the information that she needed, but I guess from a character standpoint, she didn't know why she was going to eat. Like, she was just following the lead and ended up in Egypt for that one action sequence, and then she went back home. So I don't know. It wasn't the best action sequence in my mind. I did see someone online say that there wasn't enough action in this movie, and that the issue with this movie was that it was too emotional, and Wonder Woman was given too much of an emotional arc and not enough of an action arc. And I take a little bit of issue with that, because why is this a problem? Why is an emotional arc any less interesting than an action arc. It should be just as interesting, if not more so, because the character is going through things internally as opposed to just punching a bad guy in the face. If you want to watch people punch bad guys in the face, that's totally fine, and that's kind of what the end of Avengers Endgame is just a big battle. But really, I like to see a character struggling with something more than anything else, and that's why, going back to the best movies ever made, we're talking about Lord of the Rings now, when we get to the climax, and Frodo is just carrying such a weight, and he can't even bring himself to separate himself with the ring because he's internalizing, and he's like, the ring has almost become an addiction for him, and he can't separate himself from it. That's all internal. We're seeing it on his face, and the struggle that he has when he loses the ring and he wakes back up and Sam gives it back to him. The look on his face when he puts the ring back on around his neck is, yes, I'm back. Like, it's getting another hit from a drug or something like that. And so I don't see why this movie can't have more of an emotional impact than any other action-driven film. Because really, let's look at Captain America and compare Captain America to the Wonder Woman, because really they're very similar. Especially like the first movie, they each took place in World War, and then they're displaced outside of time in their sequel. Both sequels take place in Washington, D.C., and they're dealing with a new world and trying to find their place in it and all of that stuff. And they're dealing with the loss of their loved one who was left behind in a prior time. They both star people named Chris. they're all of the similarities. There are so many here. But let's look at Captain America's motivations in The Winter Soldier. He's talking about freedom, and it's all about freedom and right to bear arms, and all of these different things are kind of rolled into the themes of this movie. And yes, there is a big action climax, but it's deeply rooted in Captain America's friendship with Bucky, and that's what the climax of The Winter Soldier rides on. And nobody's complaining about that. So why are we complaining about a movie where the main character is a woman and she's being emotional, and that's a problem? Women and men can all be emotional. It's totally fine. Why? I don't understand why someone's complaining that this movie didn't have enough action. There's plenty of action. I think the issue is that there's not enough action. I think the action was a little lackluster, and we didn't get as an impactful action sequence as in the first Wonder Woman, where we had, what is it called? No Man's Land. That is an incredible action sequence. My brother and I were talking about this the other day. That No Man's Land sequence might be the best action sequence of the entire DC Extended Universe, and we're not even going to talk about how this movie ties into the DC movies and where it fits in the timeline, because they don't care, so we shouldn't care. They're doing their own thing. It's all up in the air on what's happening with that, so we're not going to talk about that. But that No Man's Land scene, the music is so good. Everything that Diana is fighting for and standing for, it's just phenomenal. And we didn't really get something like that in this movie. I think that's part of the reason that the person maybe said there wasn't enough action. I don't think that's the problem. I think the way the action was done was just poorly executed. Also, while I'm on that, I felt like the musical score wasn't as on point as the first movie. When we had action sequences and the Wonder Woman theme came in, oh man, I love that Wonder Woman theme, but it was really toned down for this movie, and I don't get why. Because the way that the guitar riffs go in the Wonder Woman theme music, I think that has a very 1980s rock punk type feel, and it would have fit perfectly into this time era, and they didn't use it exactly the way that it was used in the other movie, and I don't understand why, because it's such good music. And so as a result, I didn't like the score for this movie as much, and if you listen to my Soul review, I didn't really like the score there either, so it's a week for disappointing scores, I guess. But going back to the emotional element of Diana, I thought the scene of her giving up Chris Trevor and him going back was very impactful. I liked that a lot, and what he had to say before he left, I really liked it a lot. My wife said that she was tearing up during that sequence, so it hit emotionally there. So I thought it was really good. That aspect of the story, for sure, of Diana not being able to give up Steve was just, it was a big deal. And she makes a very good point where she says, I sacrifice so much, I work so hard for these people, I save them, I do all this stuff, why can't I just have this one thing for me? Why can't I just be a little bit selfish and have you with me? And that's all she wants. And that's totally fine. And it totally makes sense that she would want that given how much she sacrifices. Why can't she have just this one thing? And I really liked that, but I don't understand how it ties into the theme of truth. I guess you could make the argument that she needs to accept the truth that he is dead and he's in the past and she needs to leave him there and move on, but that seems more of a theme of living in the past and moving on, not accepting truth, because truth is living in a lie as opposed to not accepting the past. I feel like there's a dissonance there, and we could be a little more clear as to exactly what truth is and what living in the past is, and we could have made a distinction. And unfortunately, I just feel like that theme of truth just doesn't quite fit into this movie. So if you're looking for a theme, it's there, but I don't think it's substantiated throughout the course of the film. I think that's pretty much it that I have to say about this movie, though. I'm confused that a lot of people really hated, but if that's how you feel, that's how you feel. And that just goes to show how subjective movies are. You know, a lot of people really love Interstellar. I don't like that movie at all, so it just goes to show that way, right? So ranking it, I think it's just as good as the first movie. It's weaker in some areas, stronger in others, but overall, I enjoyed Wonder Woman 1984. What I'm going to ask you guys, though, is have you seen Wonder Woman 1984? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Hate it? Love it? Kind of somewhere in the middle like I am? I would love to know. You can feel free to reach out to me. You can do that on social media. You can find me on Twitter at PottleNathan, and you can find the show on Instagram at Movies Are Awesome Podcast. You can also subscribe to the show. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and a whole bunch of other places. All of that stuff is in the show notes below. As I said at the beginning of the show, next week is going to be my most anticipated movies for 2021, so keep an eye out for that episode. Thank you so much again for listening, and as always, if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.